Felt like he was really seriously thinking about leaving San Antonio to go to Orlando. I've heard stories that Popovich and Robinson and they really recruited him hard, and ultimately he stayed. But sometimes it's fun to think about what could have happened.
Welcome into Scrap the Playbook. Today we're here with Grant Hill, who, Grant, as I kind of just said before the show, you've sort of been on the biggest stage of basketball at seemingly every stage, right? From college hoops to different parts of your NBA career into Team USA basketball. So just super hyped to have you on and kind of get your perspective on not only stuff that's happening in the league and with Team USA today, but the unique perspective you can provide from all of your years you've dedicated to this sport. So seriously, thank you so much for hopping on.
Thanks for that kind introduction. Certainly excited to be on with you, Adam.
I said we'll save Team USA stuff for the end here, and I kind of want to go back to the college era of you at Duke. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong with this little tidbit I got, but before you went to Duke, is it true that your dad potentially wanted you to go to UNC?
Yeah, well, I mean, I did too. I grew up a Georgetown and North Carolina fan. I grew up, Northern Virginia. And, I vividly remember I was 9 years old and watching the NCAA championship game in 1982 when Georgetown played North Carolina. And so we had been following Georgetown. Patrick Ewing was a freshman that year. Eric Sleepy Floyd was the elder statesman as a senior on that Hoya basketball team. They played against, James Worthy, Dean Smith, North Carolina, and a freshman, Michael Jordan, hit the game-winning shot. And really kind of was a launching pad for him and his, iconic basketball career. And so, I was impressionable. I was young. I was falling in love with the game of basketball and instantly became a fan of those two programs. But, as I got a little older and started, excelling in basketball, I started following, Coach K and Duke University. And, there were a couple of guys that were from my area in the DMV, Johnny Dawkins and Tommy Amaker, and then later on Danny Ferry. So I started watching them in the late 80s. And the more I got to know Coach K as he was recruiting me, the more it just felt right. And I believed and wanted to be a part of his vision and play for an incredible man and an incredible leader. But yeah, there was truth. I was a Carolina fan, as was my dad. But starting in 1989, we started drinking the Duke Kool-Aid, and it's been tasting good ever since.
So was it like a switch flipped basically the second you stepped on the court for Duke? All that previous fandom, just kind of in the past once you're part of the rivalry?
Even before that, you start, getting to know Coach K and just sort of, with all due respect to all the coaches that were recruiting me, there was just something about him that was magical, that you knew he was destined for greatness. And he was already on that path and on that trajectory. So I committed early in my senior year in high school and made one visit. My first visit was to Duke, and I knew when I got home that this is where I wanted to be. So, yeah, no, I was all in even before I arrived on campus as a freshman. And still a little bit shocked and amazed that I could make such a tough decision at only 16. But it was the right decision, and a decision that continues to pay off for me, 30 plus years later.
Absolutely. And look, the Duke team right now, obviously having a really strong season. Cooper Flag, the projected number one pick in the NBA draft, obviously a big part of Duke's season right now. What are your thoughts on Cooper? He's obviously been in the spotlight for a while now, I'd say. Do you see any of your game and his as kind of this sort of somewhat of like a point forward, kind of all-around forward player?
Yeah, no, I mean, Cooper has been fantastic and has really sort of just, I think, improved throughout the regular season. We brought him in this past summer on the select team that scrimmaged and practiced against the men's national basketball team and in anticipation of the Olympics. And he made me look good by bringing him in because he had a really good day too. Was one of the better players on the court. I love his game. I love the kid. And I think that, the future is bright. But we still have unfinished business this year at Duke with the season and with the NCAA tournament goals that I know the program and I know he has. So the future will come. Right now, as part of the Duke faithful, we're living in the moment, and the moment's been really good.
Yeah, as you should definitely be living in the moment as a Duke fan right now. And like you said, Cooper, one of those guys who's been in the spotlight, is going to continue to be in the spotlight. And you dealt with a lot of that too early in your career. Being with the Pistons at the beginning of your career. I want to touch on some of your Pistons days, particularly, kind of the expectations I was talking about, right? Going in and being this franchise guy immediately. And you already mentioned looking up to Mike a bit in his UNC days. You're in the league and you're already going up against Mike in, I would say, some pretty famous duels. What was that like as like a young player to essentially go up against someone like Jordan immediately, going toe-to-toe with someone like that right as you get into the league?
When I was drafted, Michael Jordan had retired, the first time. And so he came back towards the end of my rookie year. I didn't think I'd ever get a chance, my rookie season to play against Michael. He had actually retired the year before I arrived. And so when he came back, there was, I think there was just an overall excitement that he was back in the league. And then, of course, those opportunities, those moments to compete against him and the Bulls. And the Bulls were, obviously world champions, and they were, the elite in the NBA at that time, the standard. But a chance to have some head-to-head matchups and gauge where you were. As a competitor, you want to go against the best. And he was, along with his team, they were the best. I didn't have a lot of head-to-head matchups because Scottie Pippen and I tended to guard each other. But there were times where, he was on me and I was on him. And there were times that, I got the best of him. And there were times he got the best of me, But his presence in the league in the mid to late 90s, it just elevated everything. And, watching him from afar, competing against him up close and personal, how he was the face of the league, how he helped grow the league globally, to have been a part of the league at that time was truly special.
Yeah, and for you also to just be a part of an organization like the Detroit Pistons, I feel like there is high expectations, even if it doesn't necessarily say like whatever a Lakers or Celtics market, right? People love basketball in Detroit, and I did want to touch on the season they're having too, with the breakout star in Cade Cunningham, who, again, one of these guys who had all these expectations, right? But this is the year I feel like everyone's starting to pay attention. They're in the win column more, and he's having a great season. So, what are your thoughts on Cade Cunningham and his game, how much you've gotten to watch him? What do you see Cade becoming in this league?
Yeah, well, I do know Detroit and the fan base there. And, look, I arrived right after the Bad Boys era. And so there were expectations. And they had just come off this incredible run. Isaiah Thomas, Bill Laimbeer had retired. And so there is a tradition of basketball excellence. And obviously the going to work era was strong as well, with one championship in '04. I saw Cade much like Cooper. I saw Cade Cunningham in high school. I watched him, at Mountford once again. And, it was a funny story. On Sundays, I live in this neighborhood in a country club. I'd take my daughter, who's now in high school. She was in grade school then. And we would go to the brunch at our country club. And Cade was in high school and played with Scotty Barnes. And there's a few other guys, I think Sharp, I can't remember all the guys, but they were all at Mount Verde. And one of their managers was a member at our country club. So they would all be there for brunch on Sundays. Moses Moody was on that team too, and who played for Golden State. And so I tell my daughter, who was like 8 or 9, I say, see those guys over there? Like, they're gonna be really rich one day. They're gonna be pros. Just remember those faces. And Cade, at 16, 17 years of age, even then, just a tremendous amount of maturity. He would come over, he would speak, he'd look you in your eye. You just knew there was something special about him as a person and his character. And you fast forward, the number one pick, I think he had some injuries. The team, I think, was struggling a bit. I even think last year, as hard as that was for him and for that franchise, it really kind of gave them some toughness. It gave them okay, you know what, we gotta move in the other direction now. And so they made some changes, coaches, front office, but the personnel, it's the same personnel. And Cade now has emerged. Like, he is an all-star. He's an incredible leader. He's become a guy. He's been a force, and he's brought a consistency to the game every time he steps on the court. And he has elevated that team and the guys around him. So it's fun to watch, and you feel that there's incredible momentum now with the Pistons, an incredible amount of excitement. You got a lot of young guys who have a lot of runway in front of them. So I think it's onward and upward for the Detroit Pistons and Cade Cunningham looking ahead.
Yeah, it's really nice to see Cade get this spotlight now because he has been that guy, right? To what you were saying, it's like they now kind of have that culture in place, that roster in place to support him, and he could become one of the best players in the league, as we just saw too. Probably the biggest recent NBA news, is that Luka trade to the Lakers, one of the other best players in the NBA. I did want to touch on this because I think you have a somewhat unique perspective from your Orlando days, and something that I want to say is almost a similar caliber that almost happened. This story gets tossed around a lot, but the time that Tim Duncan almost came to the Magic, I feel like you have some unique perspective on that situation. From your perspective, like, what was happening when Tim Duncan sort of almost came to the Magic from San Antonio?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the full sort of version of events through Tim's eyes. I mean, I know we had the same agent at the time. We both were free agents. We both made our visit July 1st when free agency opened up. We had great visits, and we were in sort of different situations, though. I mean, I had been 6 years in Detroit. We had made some momentum. We went from 26 wins to 46 to 54, and then we kind of slid backwards, and we changed some of the personnel. And there was just some uncertainty, I think, in terms of where we were going, what the direction was. And certainly I put a lot of the blame and fault on me as the top player, as the first, second team NBA guy on that squad. Tim, he was still maybe second, third year in the NBA. I think he had just finished his third year. He had David Robinson with him, who, was a future Hall of Famer. They had just won a championship in 1999. So, different situations. But, Tim, I thought, had a great visit. I thought when we left to go home to our respective cities after the visit, it felt like he was all in. It felt like he was really seriously thinking about leaving San Antonio to go to Orlando. And, I've heard stories that Popovich and Robinson and, they really recruited him hard. And ultimately he stayed. But, sometimes it's fun to think about what could have happened. I think of Tim and Tracy McGrady. And then, if I had been healthy, if I could have had, the health that I think we all thought I could have had at the time. Wow, you think about, you think of big threes and certainly the success of big threes in the last 25 years. I mean, I think that would have been a big three if it all had worked out. But, I think for Tim, it worked out as it was supposed to. I mean, he went and had a storybook career, all in San Antonio, winning championships, MVPs, and going down as arguably the greatest power forward and one of the greatest players ever. And so I think he made the right decision ultimately there at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people are always, especially just NBA fans, are always just going crazy over the like what ifs and the different stories and guys teaming up, what could have been. Is there any truth to the bit about, what was it, like something about Doc and not letting guys' family members on the plane, and that was some sort of miscommunication in the process? Was there any truth to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot that's been said about that. And I think, when you look at it through the lens of 2025, present day, it seems absurd. But, the reality of the situation was in the late 90s and early 2000s, families didn't travel on
Yeah.
the plane. That was a big no-no. And I can't remember, entirely sort of how it came up. It might have been asked at dinner. And I think, as I'm putting, things together and different stories, it sounded like that was one thing that San Antonio had promised Tim
Hmm.
was we'll let your spouse, significant other fly. And so that shows you, I think, in a way how I think one, how desperate, but also how concerned they were that he would actually leave. And so I think there was a discussion, and it was sort of like understood, like, no, that doesn't happen, even with our spouses, at the table. And I remember my wife; we were newly married at the time. She didn't flinch because that was sort of par for the course. I think if anything, she might have looked at it like, why would somebody ask that question? And
Yeah.
but I don't think that was the reason. I think even with that question being answered as it was, he was still, I think, on board. Like I think Tim was ready. He was dialed in. He wanted to go back home and really think it through. And we were staying in contact. But I think Popovich, San Antonio, David Robinson. I think they got to him, and talked him into staying. And so I think that was really the ultimate reason why he stayed.
Well, yeah, like I said, NBA fans are always going to dive into all the different, theories and putting things together. I mean, you as a basketball fan with this Luka trade, like, what was what was your initial reaction to that trade that kind of shocked everyone?
I'm not surprised anymore. I mean, I think I think we're in an interesting time. This new salary cap and some of the penalties when you're in the second apron are really severe. And in some ways, it could be looked upon as a hard cap. And I think what it's going to do is it's going to force teams, organizations, front offices to maybe take a different look to how they assemble rosters. Going out, getting 3 stars, spending heavily. You may have to do that to win, but you want to make sure you make the right decision and you bet on the right people. And if not, there's some serious consequences and taxes and so on and so forth. I don't think even fans fully understand how severe those penalties are and how they can set back your franchise. And I thought when just sort of digesting the new rules, I said, there's going to be some things that happen with trades and so on and so forth moving forward that are going to be a little bit out there and not sort of traditionally, I think, what we're accustomed to. And okay, so sort of with that context and understanding, yeah, there was definitely a surprise. You didn't hear about it. They were so stealth in terms of, negotiating it, which nowadays everything seems to leak. I think that played into it. And then just the fact that Luke has been so good and so dominant, helped him get to the finals, is young and has a lot of runway in front of him. And so, yeah, there was some surprises there. But maybe Dallas feels, look, we don't want to commit 10 years of spending, exorbitant amount of money. Whereas let's maybe try to go now. Let's try to get AD. Let's try to maybe get something else with Kyrie. We got a 3-year window, 3-year window. And then once that window closes, we can pivot. And now that's a risk and that's a gamble. I have learned, and I've learned this through my own experience, as crazy and as opinions as we all have and just trying to flush it all out, you really can't judge a trade until after the trade. You look at my own experience. I decided to leave and go to Orlando. I was a first, second team All NBA. In return, the Pistons got Ben Wallace and Chucky Atkins. And on the surface at the time, Orlando won that trade. No one thought at that time that that would be a foundational piece for the Pistons to go on and put together that going to work era. No one thought at that time that I would, have injuries and be unable to play for 4 years and be a shell of myself when I came back. And so I have learned from my own experience not to judge anything, whether it's a draft pick or a trade, over time. I think we'll be able to evaluate the results of that. But I love it. I love the fact that there's excitement, that trades are happening, that people are willing to pull the trigger, try something new. It takes a lot of nerve and a lot of gall and a lot of courage to do that. And just from a leadership standpoint, I applaud both organizations for taking that risk. And we'll see in the long run how it plays out.
I appreciate that perspective. It's great perspective too to what you were saying of there's so many inner workings of team building, right? Between what you were saying, like committing to a super max contract, and now there's the second aprons that teams have to deal with. So all of that is being factored into these like very hard decisions, and I think it's a good segue into some USA basketball. You're obviously involved in a lot of this sort of selection process for Team USA. I'm curious, just when you're laying the roster out for a Team USA basketball roster, of course, these are going to be like the best players in the world. But at the same time, you're building a team, right? You're trying to have guys who can fill certain roles, and maybe they're not used to that from being the franchise guy wherever they're playing in the NBA. So, what is that like to sort of take the best players in the world and be one of the guys responsible for assembling how are we going to make the best possible roster possible?
It's an awesome, overwhelming exercise. And, unlike an NBA general manager or president of basketball operations, you have sort of the pick of the litter. You have all these guys who are so incredibly talented and they want to be a part of this team. So you don't have to execute trades and hope that somebody signs with you. So that part is a little bit different. But, I think a couple of things. One, it's understanding the FIBA game. And the FIBA game is different than our NBA game. And so respecting that and understanding, okay, the nuances of the game, the style of play, the way the game is officiated. The FIBA game right now, and there's been a lot of chatter about sort of the three-point shooting in the NBA and sort of it's a cookie-cutter league. Everybody does the same thing. But in FIBA, there are different styles, and some of those styles or differences are a reflection of the countries and the personalities and so on and so forth. And so you start looking at the elite teams and how they play and who they have on their team. And so you want to, assemble your roster for a variety of things that you're going to see on this run for a gold medal. And so it's sort of checking the boxes in terms of, okay, what exactly you need. And then you want pieces that complement. There were some incredible players that were left off. There were players that I'm a fan of, the players that, you can make a statement or an argument that they're deserving, from a talent, from a stature standpoint. But, I was charged with putting together what you said, Adam, a team, and not a collection of the 12 best players necessarily. I think we had a great team and we had great talent. I think we had maybe half the team already solidified as Hall of Famers. And I think you have the other half are on their way to be solidified as Hall of Famers. So the team was really talented, but the pieces fit. And there was intentionality about everyone on that team and the role that they could provide for our squad. And so I recognize that you could get 10 different people and you could have 10 different rosters. And that's the beauty of sports and being a fan and having opinions. But ultimately, we loved our roster. We loved the buy-in. We loved the challenge. We loved the fact that it was hard. And ultimately, we loved the result. And that was getting a gold medal, which wasn't easy to do.
Yeah, not easy at all, especially, just to see how far other countries have come, too, and how competitive they can be in FIBA against Team USA. And look, I know you have, again, so much perspective for over the years, so I want to end with just a couple of fun sort of Team USA little mini games here. If Grant Hill has to build an all-time Team USA starting five, who would it be?
Oh, wow. I want to be mindful and respectful of all the greats that came before 84. And I didn't see all of them. I know Jerry West, Oscar Robinson, they were on, Olympic teams. But I think if you look in the modern era, and at least since I was able to watch in real time, I think Michael Jordan, for his excellence in 84 and also in 92. I think Kevin Durant, how he has, he's, 4 Olympic gold medals, all-time leading scorer. He's in that conversation. I think you got to put Carmelo as well. Carmelo, Olympic Carmelo was a dangerous Carmelo. And,
yes.
and he could, really score. I think Kobe Bryant, how he came in '08, and really, I think with that young core, just provided leadership and taught them how to win, committed to defense. His impact on the program at a time when the program was trying to build its culture was invaluable. And his impact on those guys on those teams was invaluable. And then, you need somebody who can get all those great players the ball. And so I'll go with LeBron, who's a three-time gold medalist now. His leadership, his playmaking, he might not have to shoot the ball a whole lot with all that scoring on the court, but he would be able to facilitate. So those would be my five.
Yeah, not a bad starting five there. And
you
lastly,
can switch everything on defense,
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly. And to your point too, it's like all Team USA specific legends too. Like Carmelo, to your point, was just an absolute monster when he played for Team USA. Last thing I had here, if you had to make a bold prediction for someone that has never started for Team USA, but you think might be able to start in 2028 in the LA Olympics, who would you take?
Oh man, it's too early. I mean, a lot can and will happen between now and then. Players emerge, players sort of fall back. Whether they're star players or guys who would be a great fit as a complementary player. I've been watching, and I think having gone through this cycle, the 23 World Cup and the 24 Olympics, I think I'm better. I think I have a better sense of what this journey is. And, watching, I call broadcast NBA games. I'm a fan. I watch games. There's a lot of guys who are young, who, will have an opportunity, but whose games, I think, really translate on the FIBA stage. And then, of course, there's guys who've been a part of it already, who are still young and still in their prime. So, I think, there's a narrative that, we're in trouble, in 28. I look at it as appropriate fear every time we step out there. I feel like we're always in trouble because these teams are so good. But I think we have a chance to be good, and I think we have a chance to be competitive and a chance to win gold, which is the ultimate standard for USA basketball. So I'm excited. I think we'll be ready for the challenge. I'm not answering your question.
Very fair.
I think there's some really strong candidates out there.
No, absolutely. Grant, look, thank you so much for taking the time today. Really, really just enjoyed your perspective. I tried to squeeze in most of your NBA career into current NBA news, but that could have gone on for hours and hours. So really, really appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, no problem. No problem at all. Thank you.